All right, so now we're going to talk about the diagnostic criteria for PTSD and a little description of PTSD. Um, in the DSM 5, there is a criteria for children 6 years and above. They also have criteria for children 6 and younger, but we will be focusing on age older than 6, around 11 years old. So there's, let's see, A, B, C, D, E, and F, G, and H. Categories in this diagnosis. So A is the exposure to the actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence in one or more of the following ways: either directly experiencing the traumatic events, witnessing in person the events as it occurred to others, learning that the traumatic events occurred to a close family member or close friend. In cases of actual threatened death of a family member or friend, the event must have been violent or accidental. Experiencing repeated or extreme exposure to aversive details of the traumatic event. So that's section A, right? The exposure of it. Section B is more about the symptoms of PTSD. So section B is the presence of one or more of the following intrusion symptoms associated with the traumatic events beginning after the events occurred. So if after the events occurred, they have recurrent, involuntary, and intrusive distressing memories of the traumatic event. And note, in children older than 6 years old, repetitive play may occur in which themes or aspects of the traumatic event are expressed. So that's something to look at, especially when we're talking about treatment and talking about play therapy, and really utilizing this play therapy to maybe get into some deeper memories that the child may have forgotten or may have suppressed. So distressing memories or reoccurring distressing dreams in which the content and or the effect of the dream are related somehow to the traumatic event. In children, it says there may be frightening dreams without recognizable content, right? So maybe, having the scary bear in their nightmare, but not really anything behind that. But that bear could definitely be representing something, right? So we want to kind of look deeper into that and the dreams they're having. Still in section B, but dissociative reactions, flashbacks in which the individual feels or acts as if the traumatic events were reoccurring. Such reactions may occur on a continuum, without the most extreme expression being a complete loss of awareness of present surroundings. Again, in children, trauma-specific reenactment may occur in play. Intense or prolonged psychological distress at exposure to internal or external cues that symbolize or resemble an aspect of the traumatic event. Marked physiological reactions to internal or external cues that symbolize or resemble an aspect of the traumatic event. So again, just one of those is needed for there to be a diagnosis, or at least for that section, right? And then section C is persistent avoidance of stimuli associated with the traumatic event or events beginning after the traumatic events occurred, as evidenced by one or more of the following. Avoidance of or efforts to avoid distressing memories, thoughts, or feelings about or closely associated with the traumatic events. Avoidance of or efforts to avoid external reminders, people, places, conversations, activities, objects, and situations, and that arouse distressing memories, thoughts, or feelings about or closely associated with the traumatic events. And section D is negative alterations in cognitions and mood associated with the traumatic events, beginning or worsening after the traumatic events occurred, as evidenced by two or more of the following. One, inability to remember an important aspect of the traumatic event, typically due to dissociative amnesia and not to other factors such as head injury, alcohol, or drugs, right? So we want to make sure in our assessments that we're doing the substance analysis, we're doing a medical check to ensure that it's not due to something else, right? This inability to remember is because of the PTSD and the disassociation that occurred with it. Also, there is persistent and exaggerated negative beliefs or expectations about oneself, others, or the world. Persistent or distorted cognitions about the cause or consequences of the traumatic events that led the individual to blame themselves or others. Persistent negative emotional state, which is either fear, horror, anger, guilt, or shame. Marked diminished interest or participation in significant activities. Feelings of detachment or estrangement from others. Persistent inability to experience positive emotions. Inability to experience happiness, satisfaction, or loving feelings. All right, so these are all things that we're going to have to address in the assessment to really understand the severity and to make sure that we really get the proper diagnosis of PTSD. A lot of times PTSD is either is not addressed, or we ignore the fact that things that happened a long time ago. But I think PTSD is a big thing and a big diagnosis, and so we got to make sure we do our due diligence during the assessment to really make sure it is PTSD and not something else, right? That's going to affect the whole treatment that we provide. Section E, marked alterations in arousal and reactivity associated with the traumatic events, beginning or worsening after the traumatic events occurred, as evidenced by two or more of the following. Irritable behavior and angry outbursts with little or no provocation, typically expressed as verbal or physical aggression towards people or objects. Reckless or self-destructive behavior, hypervigilance, exaggerated startle response, problems with concentration, sleep disturbances, either sleeping too much or too little. The duration of the disturbance is more than 1 month. So section G, the disturbance causes clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning, right? That's an important part there. Is it impacting and impairing either a social or occupational category? And in children, that's going to be social, right? They're not going to be working, but we're going to look at their home life and their school. I think looking at their education is going to be a big revealer of what's going on inside of them. And the last one for the diagnostic criteria for PTSD is section H, which is the disturbance is not attributable to the physiological effects of a substance. It could be medication as well, alcohol, or any other medical condition. So that is the diagnostic criteria for PTSD.